Hi students, we're back with lesson 9.3a. Today we're going to be looking at the two essential questions. What are the forms of the quadratic equation and what do they tell us about the graph? And the second essential question is how does the factored form work? So to begin, we're going to review the three forms. If you don't have your notes out, please take those out. The three forms that we have been working with, the first is the general form. The general form is going to tell us our y-intercept. So the c value right here is always going to denote the y-intercept of the graph. We're going to look at that today with a little more detail. The second form we worked with was the vertex form. We studied this form last week, and the vertex form will always tell you the vertex of the graph. The vertex of the graph is the maximum or minimum, or the highest or lowest point, and the vertex is the coordinate h, k. It also tells us the axis of symmetry. The axis of symmetry is going to be the h value, and we represent this with the equation x equals whatever h is. The third and final form that we will work with, and we're going to study more today, is what we call the factored form. R1 and R2 represent the word roots. Roots are basically where does the graph cross the x-axis. So oftentimes you'll see these will be used alongside the word x-intercept. All right, let's go ahead and explore a graph. So here I have graphed an equation for us. On our graph that is here, you will see that we have our x and y axes. I'm going to just go ahead and make those a little bit darker for you. So we have the x axis is here, and the y axis is here. So that might help some of us just to get a better view of what's going on. So the first question that I've asked over here on the right-hand side is, what is the y-intercept? The y-intercept is basically where does the graph cross the y-axis? In this case, the graph is crossing the y-axis at the value of -8. So we can write this as a point. We went 0 over and we went 8 down. So the y-intercept is known as the point 0, -8. We also can identify that the y-intercept is -8 from that general form that I gave you at the beginning of this problem. The next thing I ask you about is the vertex. The vertex is the highest or lowest point. In this case, our vertex is considered to be a minimum because it is a low point of the graph. The lowest point in which our graph crosses is here at 1, -9. And we would say our axis of symmetry, or the line that cuts it directly in half, is happening at x equals 1. If I asked you to write the equation of this graph in vertex form, you would write it using our vertex form from above. And in place of the h and k, we would place our 1 and -9. So we would have x minus 1 squared. And then the k value is -9, so I'd put in a -9. Notice that I'm leaving a out, and the reason I'm leaving a out is because a in this problem was 1, or an invisible one, and so that's where it would also be in this case. All right, moving on to the final part, the factored form. The factored form is going to rely on the roots. Our roots are taking place at these two values right here. Oftentimes, we'll refer to our roots as x equals values. So we would say x equals -2, or you could write it as a point. The point would be -2, 0, and x equals 4, which would be 4, 0. Now, this x equals is another way of saying the r value in our problem up above. So when you see that x equals for the root, this is the number that would go in place of the R1. And this value would be the value you would put in place of the R2. So when I write this equation in factored form, then I would have y equals x minus -2, and then I'd have x minus 4. Now we know that two negatives make it a positive, so more often than not, you would probably write this as x plus 2 times x minus 4. All right, so that's an example of us taking those key points from our graph and placing them into each of the forms accordingly. Let's go ahead and just take a moment and summarize a couple of those key details that we just recently reviewed. The first key detail we're going to review is the y-intercept. The y-intercept is basically saying, where is the graph crossing the y-axis? It is the c value in the general form. The second big idea that we covered here is the roots. The roots are the x value where the graph passes through the x-axis or crosses the x-axis. That's why we often refer to them as x-intercepts. The next part that we have is the vertex. The vertex of the graph is the highest or lowest point. And last but not least, the A value. The A value of our graph is going to represent if the graph has been vertically stretched or shrunk. The A value will be the same in all forms of the equation. So all of our equations above had an A value. It'll always be the same, and it will determine if the graph will open up or down. When the A value is positive, our graph opens up like a cup. And if it is negative, it's going to open down and form a dome. So if the A value is positive, it opens up, and if it is negative, it will open down. I hope this short video will help you better understand the three forms and how they work together.